The morning alarm pierced through the darkness at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before the intended wake-up time. Dr. Sarah Chen had been studying the brain's circadian rhythms for over a decade, yet she still found herself reaching for her phone within seconds of consciousness, a habit that neuroplasticity research had proven to be one of the most destructive patterns modern humans could engage in. As the blue light flooded her retinas, dopamine receptors fired in anticipation of notifications, emails, and the digital chaos that had become as addictive as any substance known to humanity. This seemingly innocent morning ritual represented something far more sinister than most people realized. According to Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman's groundbreaking research, the first hour after waking constitutes what he terms the neural foundation period, a critical window when the brain's neuroplasticity is at its peak, and habits formed during this time literally reshaped the architecture of consciousness itself. The decision to immediately flood the visual cortex with artificial light and fragmentary information creates a cascade of neurochemical reactions that would influence cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and decision-making capacity for the entire day ahead. The human brain, evolved over millions of years to process natural light gradually and focus on singular tasks for extended periods, now found itself under assault from technologies that hijacked its most fundamental operating systems. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and self-control, became overwhelmed by the constant stream of notifications, emails, and digital stimuli that characterized modern existence. Each ping, buzz, and flash of artificial light triggered the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, creating a state of chronic hypervigilance that Dr. Huberman's research had linked to accelerated cognitive decline, impaired memory formation, and the gradual erosion of what philosophers had long called the sovereign self. Sarah's laboratory at the university had become a sanctuary where she studied the brain's remarkable capacity for both destruction and renewal. The walls were lined with brain scans showing the dramatic differences between individuals who maintained consistent sleep schedules, engaged in regular physical exercise, and practiced focused attention versus those who had succumbed to the digital dissolution of modern life. The contrasts were startling. Brains that had been disciplined through conscious habit formation showed increased gray matter density, enhanced neural connectivity, and robust neurogenesis even into advanced age. Meanwhile, brains subjected to chronic stress, irregular sleep, and constant digital stimulation displayed patterns remarkably similar to those seen in neurodegenerative diseases. The concept of neuroplasticity had revolutionized understanding of human potential in the 21st century. Unlike previous generations of scientists who believed the adult brain was fixed and unchangeable, researchers like Huberman had demonstrated that neural pathways could be strengthened, weakened, or completely rewired based on consistent patterns of behavior. This discovery carried profound implications that extended far beyond academic research. It meant that every individual possessed the biological capacity to literally reshape their own consciousness through deliberate practice and disciplined action. However, the same neuroplasticity that offered hope for human transformation also made the brain vulnerable to degradation through poor choices. The neural pathways strengthened through repetition operated according to a principle Huberman termed use it or lose it. Circuits that were regularly activated grew stronger and more efficient, while those that remained dormant gradually withered away. This meant that habits of distraction, immediate gratification, and passive consumption didn't merely waste time, they actively weakened the brain's capacity for sustained attention, creative thinking, and emotional resilience. The modern epidemic of anxiety, depression, and cognitive dysfunction wasn't primarily the result of chemical imbalances or genetic predispositions, though these factors certainly played a role. Instead, it reflected the cumulative impact of millions of small daily choices that either supported or undermined optimal brain function. The average person checked their smartphone over 150 times per day, triggering dopamine release cycles that created addiction-like patterns in the brain's reward circuitry. Social media platforms had been explicitly designed using principles from behavioral psychology to maximize engagement, creating feedback loops that exploited the brain's natural tendency to seek novelty and social validation. Dr. Chen's research had focused specifically on what she called microdestructions, seemingly harmless behaviors that gradually degraded cognitive performance over time. These included the practice of multitasking, which neuroimaging studies had shown to be neurologically impossible despite widespread belief to the contrary. When people believed they were multitasking, they were actually engaging in rapid task switching that increased cortisol production, reduced working memory capacity, and significantly impaired the formation of long-term memories. The brain's executive function networks, particularly the prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, showed measurable stress responses when forced to constantly shift between different types of information processing. Sleep disruption represented another category of microdestruction with catastrophic long-term consequences. Huberman's research had demonstrated that the brain's glymphatic system, responsible for clearing metabolic waste and toxins, operated primarily during deep sleep phases. Individuals who consistently slept less than 7 hours per night or maintained irregular sleep schedules showed accelerated accumulation of amyloid plaques and tau proteins, the same pathological markers associated with Alzheimer's disease. The popular culture myth of the successful individual who thrived on minimal sleep had been thoroughly debunked by neuroscience research showing that chronic sleep deprivation literally poisoned the brain over time. Perhaps most insidiously, many modern habits created what neuroscientists called learned helplessness at the cellular level. When neural circuits responsible for sustained attention, delayed gratification, and emotional regulation were repeatedly abandoned in favor of easier alternatives, they gradually lost their strength and efficiency. This created a vicious cycle where individuals found it increasingly difficult to engage in the very behaviors that would strengthen their cognitive capacity, leading to a progressive weakening of mental resilience and self-control. The processed food industry had also contributed to this neurological decline through the proliferation of highly palatable foods designed to override natural satiety signals. Ultra-processed foods containing high levels of sugar, refined carbohydrates, and artificial additives triggered inflammatory responses in the brain that impaired cognitive function and emotional regulation. The blood-brain barrier, designed to protect neural tissue from harmful substances, became compromised when subjected to chronic inflammation, allowing toxins and inflammatory molecules to directly damage brain cells. Social media platforms represented perhaps the most sophisticated assault on human consciousness ever devised. The intermittent reinforcement schedules used by these platforms, where users received unpredictable rewards in the form of likes, comments, and shares, created addiction patterns that were neurochemically indistinguishable from gambling or substance abuse. The constant comparison with others' curated online personas triggered chronic stress responses that elevated cortisol levels and suppressed the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a protein essential for neural growth and repair. Yet within this landscape of neurological destruction lay profound opportunities for transformation. The same neuroplasticity that made the brain vulnerable to degradation also enabled its remarkable capacity for renewal and enhancement. Individuals who understood these principles could harness them to literally upgrade their cognitive capabilities and emotional resilience. The key lay in understanding that the brain operated according to predictable biological laws that could be leveraged through conscious choice and consistent practice. Morning routines represented the most powerful leverage point for neurological transformation because they occurred during the brain's peak neuroplastic state. Huberman's protocols emphasized the critical importance of viewing bright natural light within the first hour of waking to properly calibrate circadian rhythms and optimize neurotransmitter production throughout the day. This simple practice enhanced the production of serotonin during daylight hours and melatonin during evening hours, creating the foundation for restorative sleep and optimal cognitive performance. Physical exercise represented another non-negotiable component of brain optimization. Aerobic activity triggered the release of BDNF, which Dr. Huberman often described as miracle grow for the brain. Regular cardiovascular exercise increased the volume of the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory formation and learning, while simultaneously reducing inflammation and promoting the growth of new neural connections. The benefits extended far beyond physical fitness to include enhanced creativity, improved emotional regulation, and increased resistance to stress and anxiety. The practice of focused attention, whether through meditation, reading, or engaging in challenging cognitive tasks, strengthened the prefrontal cortex and improved executive function. Neuroscientist Judson Brewer's research had shown that even brief periods of focused attention practice could measurably increase gray matter density in brain regions associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation. The key was consistency rather than duration. 15 minutes of daily focused practice produced more significant neural changes than sporadic longer sessions. Nutritional choices also played a crucial role in supporting optimal brain function. The brain consumed approximately 20% of the body's total energy despite representing only 2% of body weight, making it particularly sensitive to blood sugar fluctuations and nutrient deficiencies. Diets rich in omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, and complex carbohydrates supported neural growth and protected against inflammatory damage. Intermittent fasting protocols, when implemented safely, triggered the production of ketones that served as an alternative fuel source for the brain and promoted the growth of new neural connections. The social environment also profoundly influenced brain structure and function. Mirror neuron systems meant that individuals unconsciously adopted the emotional states, behavioral patterns, and even neural activity patterns of those around them. Surrounding oneself with individuals who embodied discipline, curiosity, and emotional resilience literally rewired the brain to embody these same qualities. Conversely, chronic exposure to negative, distracted, or emotionally dysregulated individuals gradually weakened the neural circuits responsible for positive traits. Temperature exposure represented an emerging area of neuroscience research with profound implications for brain optimization. Deliberate cold exposure through practices like cold showers or ice baths triggered the release of norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter that enhanced focus, alertness, and stress resilience. Heat exposure through saunas or hot yoga activated heat shock proteins that protected neurons against damage and promoted neural repair. These practices, rooted in ancient traditions, were now being validated by cutting-edge neuroscience research. The concept of neurogenesis, the brain's ability to generate new neurons throughout life, had fundamentally changed understanding of human potential. Previously, scientists believed that humans were born with a fixed number of neurons that only declined with age. However, research had demonstrated that the adult brain continued producing new neurons in specific regions, particularly the hippocampus, when provided with appropriate environmental inputs. Novel experiences, physical challenges, and cognitive stimulation all promoted neurogenesis, literally expanding the brain's information processing capacity. Language and communication patterns also shaped neural architecture in profound ways. The quality of internal self-talk directly influenced neural pathway strength and emotional regulation capacity. Individuals who practiced positive self-directed speech showed increased activation in brain regions associated with resilience and optimism, while those who engaged in chronic self-criticism strengthened neural circuits associated with anxiety and depression. The ancient philosophical practice of examining one's thoughts and consciously choosing empowering language had been validated by modern neuroscience as a powerful tool for brain transformation. Reading, particularly of complex literary works, activated multiple brain regions simultaneously and created rich neural networks that enhanced cognitive flexibility and emotional intelligence. The practice of deep reading, engaging with challenging texts for extended periods without distraction, strengthened attention networks and improved the brain's capacity for sustained focus. In contrast, the fragmented reading patterns encouraged by digital media created shallow neural pathways that impaired comprehension and critical thinking abilities. The timing of various activities throughout the day also influenced their neurological impact. Huberman's research had identified specific windows when the brain was optimally primed for different types of learning and performance. Complex cognitive tasks were best performed during the late morning when cortisol levels were naturally elevated and attention networks were most active. Creative work flourished during periods of relaxed attention when the default mode network could make novel connections between disparate pieces of information. Physical exercise in the late afternoon optimized both performance and sleep quality. Dr. Chen had observed these principles transforming the lives of countless research subjects who committed to implementing evidence-based brain optimization protocols. The changes weren't merely subjective improvements in mood or energy, they were measurable alterations in brain structure and function that could be observed through neuroimaging technology. Individuals who maintained consistent practices showed increased cortical thickness, enhanced white matter integrity, and improved connectivity between brain regions responsible for executive function and emotional regulation. The transformation process wasn't always linear or comfortable. The brain's existing neural pathways, strengthened through years of repetition, initially resisted change through what neuroscientists called neural inertia. Breaking established patterns required conscious effort and often triggered stress responses as the brain interpreted new behaviors as potential threats to survival. However, individuals who persisted through this initial resistance period discovered that new neural pathways gradually became stronger and more automatic, eventually requiring less conscious effort to maintain. The concept of identity played a crucial role in sustaining neurological transformation. Individuals who viewed themselves as disciplined, curious, and continuously growing created neural networks that supported these self-perceptions. The brain's predictive processing systems worked to maintain consistency between self-concept and behavior, making positive changes more sustainable when they were integrated into one's sense of identity rather than merely treated as external behaviors to be performed. Understanding the brain's neurochemical reward systems enabled individuals to design environments and routines that naturally supported positive behaviors while making destructive patterns more difficult to maintain. Rather than relying solely on willpower, which neuroscience had shown to be a finite resource that depleted throughout the day, successful transformation required what behavioral economist Richard Thaler called choice architecture that made good decisions easier and bad decisions harder. The research was clear: the human brain possessed extraordinary capacity for both destruction and renewal, and the determining factor was the accumulation of countless small choices made throughout each day. Every moment of focused attention strengthened neural circuits responsible for concentration and self-control. Every decision to engage in physical movement promoted the growth of new neurons and protected against cognitive decline. Every choice to consume nutritious food rather than processed alternatives supported optimal brain chemistry and protected against inflammation. As Dr. Chen prepared for another day of research, she reflected on the profound responsibility that came with understanding these principles. The knowledge that daily habits literally sculpted the architecture of consciousness meant that every individual possessed the power to either enhance or degrade their own cognitive capabilities through their choices. The tragedy wasn't that people lacked the capacity for transformation, it was that they often remained unaware of the extraordinary plasticity of their own brains and the precise mechanisms through which positive change could be achieved. The morning light streaming through her laboratory windows reminded her of Huberman's fundamental insight: the brain operated according to predictable biological rhythms that could either be supported or disrupted through conscious choice. Those who aligned their behaviors with these natural cycles experienced enhanced cognitive performance, emotional resilience, and overall life satisfaction. Those who ignored or actively violated these biological principles suffered the inevitable consequences of neurological dysfunction and gradual cognitive decline. The transformation of Marcus Rodriguez began on a Tuesday morning in October when he finally understood that his greatest enemy wasn't the demanding corporate environment, the endless stream of deadlines, or even the toxic colleagues who seemed determined to undermine his progress. His greatest enemy was the collection of unconscious habits that had gradually weakened his mind until he barely recognized the ambitious young man who had graduated from Stanford with dreams of changing the world. At 34, he felt mentally exhausted, emotionally reactive, and increasingly unable to access the sharp focus and creative thinking that had once defined his identity. The revelation came during a particularly brutal week when 3 major projects had collapsed simultaneously due to what his supervisor termed attention to detail issues. Marcus knew he wasn't stupid or incompetent, but his ability to sustain concentrated effort had deteriorated to the point where even simple tasks required enormous mental energy. He found himself constantly checking his phone, seeking the temporary relief of digital stimulation whenever cognitive challenges became uncomfortable. What he didn't realize was that this pattern of avoidance was systematically destroying the neural circuits responsible for persistence, creativity, and deep thinking. Dr. Huberman's research on attention and focus had identified what he called the concentration crisis affecting millions of knowledge workers in developed nations. The human brain's attention system, evolved to scan for immediate threats and opportunities in natural environments, was being overwhelmed by the artificial stimuli of modern technological society. The average office worker switched between different tasks or applications every 11 minutes, creating a state of chronic partial attention that prevented the deep focus states necessary for high-quality cognitive performance. Marcus had unwittingly trained his brain to expect constant stimulation and immediate gratification. His morning routine consisted of checking email before getting out of bed, scrolling through social media while drinking coffee, and listening to podcasts during his commute to fill every moment of potential boredom. This pattern of continuous input prevented his brain from entering what neuroscientists called default mode network states, periods of apparent mental downtime that were actually crucial for memory consolidation, creative insight, and emotional processing. The decision to reclaim his mental sovereignty began with a simple but revolutionary choice. Marcus would spend the first hour of each day without any external input. No phone, no email, no music, no podcasts, just his own thoughts and the gradual emergence of natural awareness. The initial experience was profoundly uncomfortable. His mind felt restless and agitated, constantly searching for stimulation that wasn't available. The silence felt oppressive rather than peaceful, and he found himself inventing elaborate justifications for why he needed to check his phone just quickly to handle some urgent matter. This discomfort represented what neuroscientists called withdrawal symptoms from chronic digital stimulation. Just as someone dependent on caffeine experienced headaches and fatigue when stopping coffee consumption, Marcus's brain was experiencing the stress of not receiving its expected dopamine hits from notifications and digital content. His anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for monitoring conflicts between different neural networks, was firing intensely as it tried to resolve the tension between his habitual need for stimulation and his conscious choice to remain present. However, persistence through this initial discomfort period began yielding remarkable results. After 2 weeks of maintaining his phone-free morning routine, Marcus noticed subtle but significant changes in his cognitive capacity. His ability to read complex documents without feeling restless gradually improved. He found himself naturally generating creative solutions to work problems during quiet moments instead of feeling compelled to immediately seek distraction. Most importantly, his emotional reactivity began decreasing as his prefrontal cortex regained its ability to regulate impulsive responses. The neuroscience behind these improvements involved the strengthening of what researchers called cognitive control networks, brain circuits responsible for directing attention, inhibiting distracting thoughts, and maintaining focus on chosen objectives. These networks operated like muscles, growing stronger through consistent exercise and weaker through neglect. Marcus's digital habits had essentially atrophied his cognitive control muscles, making sustained attention feel as difficult as running a marathon would feel to someone who had been sedentary for years. Physical exercise became another cornerstone of Marcus's neural transformation protocol. Huberman's research had demonstrated that aerobic activity didn't merely improve physical fitness, it fundamentally altered brain structure and function in ways that enhanced cognitive performance. During exercise, the brain released brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, a protein that promoted the growth of new neural connections and protected existing neurons against damage. Regular cardiovascular exercise increased the volume of the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus while reducing inflammation throughout the nervous system. Marcus began incorporating 20-minute high-intensity interval training sessions into his morning routine, following protocols that Huberman had identified as optimal for BDNF production. The initial weeks were challenging as his body adapted to the physical demands, but the cognitive benefits became apparent within days. His energy levels throughout the day stabilized, his sleep quality improved dramatically, and he experienced periods of mental clarity that he hadn't felt in years. The exercise served as a natural antidepressant and anxiety reducer, regulating neurotransmitter production without requiring pharmaceutical intervention. The practice of deliberate stress exposure became another powerful tool for building mental resilience. Huberman's research on stress inoculation had shown that controlled exposure to manageable stressors actually strengthened the nervous system's ability to handle larger challenges. Marcus began incorporating cold showers into his routine, initially lasting only 30 seconds but gradually building to 3 minutes of complete cold exposure. The practice was intensely uncomfortable, but it trained his prefrontal cortex to maintain rational thought and emotional regulation even under physiological stress. Cold exposure triggered the release of norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter that enhanced focus, alertness, and stress resilience. More importantly, it provided opportunities to practice what psychologists called cognitive reframing, the ability to interpret challenging situations in empowering rather than victimizing ways. Instead of experiencing the cold as something happening to him, Marcus learned to view it as something he was choosing to do for his own development. This subtle shift in perspective gradually generalized to other areas of his life, increasing his sense of agency and personal power. Sleep optimization represented perhaps the most foundational element of Marcus's transformation. Huberman's sleep protocols emphasized the critical importance of maintaining consistent sleep and wake times, viewing bright light early in the day to calibrate circadian rhythms, and avoiding screens for at least 2 hours before bedtime. Marcus had previously dismissed sleep as an unfortunate necessity that interfered with productivity, often staying up late to complete work projects or binge-watch television series. The implementation of proper sleep hygiene protocols produced improvements that surprised Marcus with their scope and intensity. His cognitive performance during the day became noticeably sharper, his emotional regulation improved significantly, and his physical energy levels increased dramatically. The brain's glymphatic system, active primarily during deep sleep, began efficiently clearing metabolic waste and toxins that had been accumulating due to years of poor sleep habits. Dreams became more vivid and emotionally meaningful as REM sleep cycles normalized. Nutritional choices also played a crucial role in supporting optimal brain function. Marcus had relied heavily on processed foods, caffeine, and alcohol to manage his energy levels and stress responses, creating biochemical chaos that impaired cognitive performance and emotional stability. He began following nutritional protocols designed to stabilize blood sugar, reduce inflammation, and support neurotransmitter production. The elimination of processed foods and added sugars initially triggered withdrawal symptoms similar to those experienced when reducing digital stimulation, but persistence led to sustained improvements in mental clarity and emotional balance. The practice of focused attention training became Marcus's most powerful tool for rebuilding cognitive strength. He began with simple meditation practices that involved maintaining awareness on his breath for progressively longer periods. Initially, his mind wandered constantly, but he learned to view these moments of distraction not as failures but as opportunities to strengthen his attention through the act of noticing and redirecting focus. Neuroscience research had shown that the moment of noticing distraction and returning attention to the chosen object actually strengthened the same neural circuits used for all forms of cognitive control. Reading complex literature replaced the consumption of fragmented digital content as Marcus's primary form of information intake. He chose challenging books that required sustained attention and deep thinking, gradually building his capacity to engage with complex ideas for extended periods without feeling restless or bored. The practice of deep reading activated multiple brain regions simultaneously and created rich neural networks that enhanced creativity, empathy, and critical thinking abilities. Social connections underwent careful curation as Marcus recognized that the emotional states and behavioral patterns of others directly influenced his own neural activity through mirror neuron systems. He began minimizing time spent with individuals who embodied chronic stress, negativity, or distraction while actively seeking relationships with people who demonstrated the qualities he wanted to develop in himself. This wasn't about judging others but rather recognizing that social environments literally shaped brain structure and function through neuroplasticity mechanisms. The elimination of multitasking represented another crucial element of Marcus's cognitive rehabilitation. Despite widespread cultural beliefs about the efficiency of multitasking, neuroscience research had proven that the human brain could only focus on one cognitively demanding task at a time. What people experienced as multitasking was actually rapid task switching that increased stress hormones, reduced working memory capacity, and significantly impaired the quality of output across all activities. Marcus began practicing what he called single-tasking by dedicating specific time blocks to individual projects without allowing interruptions or distractions. He disabled notifications on all devices during focused work periods and used environmental cues like specific lighting or music to signal to his brain that deep focus was required. The initial productivity gains were modest as his attention networks rebuilt their strength, but within months he was accomplishing higher quality work in significantly less time. Language patterns also underwent conscious modification as Marcus recognized that internal self-talk directly influenced neural pathway strength and emotional regulation capacity. Years of self-criticism and negative internal commentary had strengthened neural circuits associated with anxiety and self-doubt while weakening those associated with confidence and resilience. He began practicing what cognitive scientists called metacognitive awareness, observing his thoughts without immediately believing or acting on them while consciously choosing more empowering interpretations of challenging situations. The practice of gratitude, initially dismissed as New Age nonsense, proved to have measurable neurological effects when implemented consistently. Spending 5 minutes each evening writing down specific things he appreciated from the day gradually rewired Marcus's brain to notice positive aspects of his experience more readily. Neuroscience research had shown that gratitude practices increased activity in the prefrontal cortex while reducing activation in the amygdala, creating a more optimistic and resilient baseline emotional state. Temperature regulation through sauna use became another tool for building mental resilience while supporting physical recovery from exercise. Heat exposure triggered the production of heat shock proteins that protected neurons against damage while promoting the growth of new neural connections. More importantly, the practice of remaining calm and focused while experiencing intense heat provided opportunities to strengthen emotional regulation under challenging conditions. The concept of neural efficiency became a guiding principle for Marcus's daily choices. Every decision either strengthened or weakened specific neural pathways, and the cumulative effect of millions of small choices determined the overall architecture of consciousness. Choosing to focus despite feeling distracted strengthened attention networks. Choosing to remain calm despite feeling stressed strengthened emotional regulation circuits. Choosing to persist despite feeling uncomfortable strengthened resilience and grit. Environmental design played a crucial role in supporting positive choices while making destructive patterns more difficult to maintain. Marcus reorganized his living space to eliminate triggers for unproductive behaviors while creating cues that encouraged beneficial activities. Books became prominently displayed while smartphones were charged in another room. Exercise equipment was kept visible and easily accessible while processed foods were removed from his kitchen entirely. The transformation wasn't linear or without setbacks. Neural change required time and persistence as new pathways gradually became stronger than old ones. Marcus experienced periods of regression where old patterns temporarily reasserted themselves, particularly during times of high stress or fatigue. However, his understanding of neuroplasticity principles helped him view these setbacks as temporary challenges rather than permanent failures. Each time he redirected himself back to beneficial patterns, he was literally strengthening his brain's capacity for future positive choices. The integration of these practices created what Marcus began to recognize as a fundamentally different relationship with his own mind. Instead of feeling at the mercy of his emotions, impulses, and external circumstances, he developed what ancient philosophers had called sovereignty, the ability to consciously choose his responses regardless of what was happening around him. This wasn't about suppressing emotions or becoming rigid, but rather about developing the neural infrastructure necessary for conscious choice in every moment. 6 months into his transformation, Marcus realized that he had become a fundamentally different person not through changing his external circumstances but through systematically rebuilding the neural foundations of his consciousness. His colleagues began asking what had changed about him, noting improvements in his focus, creativity, emotional stability, and leadership presence. The work projects that had once felt overwhelming now seemed manageable, and he found himself naturally generating innovative solutions to complex problems. The most profound change was his relationship with difficulty itself. Challenges that had previously triggered stress and avoidance responses now felt like opportunities for growth and neural strengthening. He understood that comfort and ease, while pleasant, didn't promote the kind of neural growth that led to expanded capacity and resilience. Difficulty, when approached with the right mindset and tools, became the raw material for building an unbreakable mind. The boardroom fell silent as Elena Vasquez stood to address the crisis that threatened to destroy everything her technology company had built over the past decade. A critical security breach had exposed customer data, regulatory investigations were pending, and several major clients had already terminated their contracts. The 26 executives around the mahogany table looked to her with expressions ranging from panic to resignation, waiting for her response to what appeared to be an insurmountable challenge. What they witnessed in that moment was the practical application of neuroscience principles that had been transforming human potential for those wise enough to understand and implement them. Elena's response didn't emerge from natural talent or genetic advantages, it came from years of systematically building what Dr. Andrew Huberman and other neuroscience pioneers had identified as the neural architecture of unbreakable resilience. While her competitors and colleagues had unknowingly weakened their cognitive capacity through destructive daily habits, she had done the opposite, creating brain structures that thrived under pressure and generated breakthrough insights during times of maximum stress. The difference wasn't philosophical or motivational, it was neurological. The foundation of Elena's unshakable presence traced back to her understanding of what ancient Stoic philosophers had called the discipline of desire and what modern neuroscience revealed as the intentional strengthening of prefrontal cortex circuits responsible for emotional regulation and cognitive control. Years of deliberate practice had taught her nervous system to interpret crisis not as threat but as opportunity for demonstrating the capabilities she had systematically developed. Her amygdala, the brain region responsible for fear responses, had been trained through consistent exposure to controlled stress to remain calm, while her prefrontal cortex maintained access to creativity, strategic thinking, and clear communication. The neuroscience underlying this transformation involved what researchers called stress inoculation, the practice of deliberately exposing oneself to manageable challenges in order to build resilience for larger difficulties. Elena had spent years incorporating various forms of beneficial stress into her daily routine, understanding that the brain's adaptation mechanisms would strengthen whatever neural pathways were consistently activated under challenging conditions. Cold exposure, intense physical exercise, public speaking, difficult conversations, and complex problem-solving had all served as training grounds for building unbreakable mental strength. Her morning routine embodied principles that Huberman's research had identified as optimal for cognitive performance and emotional regulation. She awakened without an alarm clock, having trained her circadian rhythms through consistent sleep and wake times aligned with natural light exposure. The first hour of her day contained no external input, no phone, no email, no news consumption, allowing her default mode network to process information from the previous day while setting clear intentions for the hours ahead. This practice had gradually enhanced her ability to think strategically and creatively by giving her brain the space it needed for deep processing and insight generation. Physical exercise served as both the foundation and catalyst for Elena's cognitive transformation. Following protocols derived from exercise physiology research, she engaged in high-intensity interval training 4 days per week combined with longer moderate-intensity sessions twice weekly. This pattern optimized the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor (BDNF) while promoting neurogenesis in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. The cognitive benefits extended far beyond improved focus and memory to include enhanced stress resilience, emotional regulation, and creative problem-solving capacity. The practice of deliberate discomfort had become central to Elena's approach to building mental strength. She understood that the brain's adaptation mechanisms required progressive overload, just like muscles needed increasing resistance to grow stronger. Regular cold exposure through ice baths trained her sympathetic nervous system to remain calm under physiological stress while building confidence in her ability to handle any uncomfortable situation. Heat exposure through sauna sessions promoted the production of heat shock proteins that protected neurons while providing opportunities to practice maintaining mental clarity under intense conditions. Nutritional protocols designed to optimize brain chemistry formed another pillar of Elena's cognitive enhancement system. She had eliminated processed foods, refined sugars, and alcohol from her diet while emphasizing nutrients known to support neurotransmitter production and reduce neural inflammation. Omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, and high-quality proteins provided the biochemical foundation for optimal cognitive performance, while intermittent fasting protocols promoted the production of ketones that served as an alternative fuel source for enhanced mental clarity. Sleep optimization represented perhaps the most crucial element of Elena's transformation. Understanding that the brain's lymphatic system cleared metabolic waste primarily during deep sleep phases, she maintained strict sleep hygiene practices that ensured 7 to 8 hours of high-quality rest each night. Her bedroom was kept completely dark and cool, electronic devices were banned for 2 hours before bedtime, and she used specific breathing techniques to activate her parasympathetic nervous system for optimal recovery. The result was consistently high cognitive performance and emotional stability throughout demanding workdays. The cultivation of focused attention had literally rewired Elena's brain to access flow states and deep concentration on demand. Years of meditation practice had strengthened her ability to maintain unwavering focus on chosen objectives while remaining aware of but not distracted by competing thoughts and stimuli. Neuroscience research had shown that meditation practice increased cortical thickness in areas associated with attention and sensory processing while reducing activity in the default mode network regions associated with mind-wandering and self-referential thinking. Reading complex literature and engaging with challenging intellectual content had created rich neural networks that enhanced creativity, empathy, and strategic thinking abilities. Elena deliberately chose books and articles that required sustained attention and deep thinking, gradually building her capacity to engage with complex ideas for extended periods. This practice activated multiple brain regions simultaneously and promoted the formation of novel neural connections that enhanced innovative problem-solving capacity. Social connections underwent careful curation based on Elena's understanding of mirror neuron systems and emotional contagion effects. She recognized that the emotional states and behavioral patterns of others directly influenced her own neural activity, so she actively sought relationships with individuals who embodied the qualities she wanted to strengthen in herself. Conversations became opportunities for mutual growth rather than energy-draining obligations, and she learned to maintain emotional boundaries while remaining compassionate and supportive. The principle of neural efficiency guided Elena's approach to decision-making and habit formation. She understood that every choice either strengthened or weakened specific neural pathways, and the cumulative effect of millions of small decisions determined the overall architecture of consciousness. This perspective transformed routine activities into opportunities for growth, choosing to remain calm during traffic strengthened emotional regulation circuits, choosing to complete challenging tasks despite feeling resistance strengthened perseverance pathways, and choosing to speak truthfully despite social pressure strengthened integrity networks. Language patterns received conscious attention as Elena recognized that internal self-talk directly influenced neural pathway strength and emotional regulation capacity. She practiced what cognitive scientists called cognitive reframing, interpreting challenging situations through empowering rather than victimizing lenses while maintaining realistic assessment of actual circumstances. This wasn't about positive thinking or denial but rather about choosing interpretations that enhanced rather than diminished her capacity to respond effectively to difficult situations. Environmental design supported beneficial choices while making destructive patterns more difficult to maintain. Elena's workspace was organized to eliminate distractions and promote deep focus, with natural lighting, plants, and minimal visual clutter. Her home environment prioritized rest, recovery, and meaningful activities over passive entertainment consumption. These environmental modifications reduced the cognitive load required to maintain beneficial behaviors while creating automatic cues that encouraged positive choices. The integration of breathwork techniques provided Elena with immediate tools for nervous system regulation and enhanced cognitive performance. Specific breathing patterns could activate either sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system responses, allowing her to generate alertness and focus when needed or promote calm and recovery during appropriate times. Box breathing, cyclic sighs, and deliberate breath holds became practical tools for optimizing mental state regardless of external circumstances. Temperature therapy through both cold and heat exposure created additional opportunities for building stress resilience while supporting physical recovery and cognitive enhancement. Regular sauna sessions promoted the production of heat shock proteins that protected neurons against damage while providing opportunities to practice maintaining mental clarity under challenging conditions. Cold exposure triggered the release of norepinephrine and other neurotransmitters that enhanced focus and stress resilience while building confidence and the ability to handle discomfort. The practice of gratitude wasn't merely a feel-good exercise but a scientifically validated method for rewiring neural pathways associated with emotional regulation and life satisfaction. Elena spent 5 minutes each evening writing down specific aspects of her day that she appreciated, gradually training her brain to notice positive elements of her experience more readily. This practice increased activity in the prefrontal cortex while reducing activation in the amygdala, creating a more optimistic and resilient baseline emotional state. Cognitive challenges through learning new skills, solving complex problems, and engaging with unfamiliar concepts promoted neurogenesis and enhanced cognitive flexibility. Elena regularly took on projects outside her expertise area, learned new languages, and studied subjects unrelated to her professional work. This practice kept her brain adaptable and resilient while building confidence in her ability to master any challenge through consistent effort and proper methodology. The concept of identity transformation played a crucial role in sustaining these neurological changes. Elena didn't merely practice beneficial behaviors, she became someone for whom these behaviors were natural expressions of her character. The brain's predictive processing systems worked to maintain consistency between self-concept and behavior, making positive changes more sustainable when they were integrated into one's fundamental sense of identity rather than treated as external disciplines to be performed. As Elena addressed the crisis facing her company that morning, every element of her systematic neural training came into play. Her nervous system remained calm and focused despite the high-stakes situation, allowing her access to creative problem-solving capabilities that stress typically impaired. Her emotional regulation training enabled her to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation without becoming overwhelmed by anxiety or panic. Her cognitive control networks maintained clear thinking and strategic perspective while others around the table were consumed by reactive emotions. The solutions she proposed emerged from neural networks that had been strengthened through years of consistent practice and challenge. Her ability to communicate clearly and confidently inspired trust and cooperation from routine, while her strategic thinking identified opportunities within the crisis that others had missed. Most importantly, her unshakable presence served as an anchor of stability that allowed others to access their own higher capabilities rather than being consumed by fear and confusion. The outcome of that crisis validated Elena's investment in systematic self-development. Her company not only survived the security breach but emerged stronger and more resilient due to the improvements implemented during the recovery process. The way she handled the situation attracted positive attention from investors, partners, and potential team members who recognized the rare combination of competence and character she embodied. More importantly, she experienced deep satisfaction from knowing that her response had emerged from genuine strength rather than pretense or manipulation. The transformation from weak to unbreakable hadn't happened overnight or through dramatic revelations. It had emerged through the consistent application of neuroplasticity principles that gradually rewired her brain for excellence. Every morning routine that prioritized neural optimization over immediate gratification had strengthened her cognitive capacity. Every workout session had promoted neurogenesis and stress resilience. Every moment of choosing focus over distraction had reinforced attention networks that enabled flow states and peak performance. Elena understood that the brain she had developed through systematic training had become her greatest asset and most reliable source of security. External circumstances could change dramatically, economic conditions could shift unpredictably, and relationships could end unexpectedly, but the neural architecture she had built through years of conscious choice remained constant. Her cognitive abilities, emotional regulation capacity, and stress resilience traveled with her regardless of context, providing a foundation of strength that couldn't be taken away by external forces. The principle that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others had proven itself through practical application rather than merely philosophical contemplation. By systematically eliminating the neural patterns associated with reactivity, distraction, and emotional dysfunction, Elena had built something genuinely unbreakable, not through avoiding challenges but through developing the capacity to thrive under any conditions. Her example demonstrated that the highest form of personal development wasn't about positive thinking, motivational speeches, or external achievements, but about the patient work of rebuilding consciousness itself through the deliberate application of neuroscience principles. The brain's neuroplasticity meant that anyone could undertake this transformation regardless of their starting point, but it required the wisdom to understand the principles involved and the discipline to apply them consistently over time. The morning light streaming through the boardroom windows reminded Elena of Huberman's fundamental insight about circadian biology and its impact on cognitive performance. Even in this moment of crisis, she remained attuned to the natural rhythms that supported optimal brain function. The foundation of unbreakable strength wasn't built through heroic acts or dramatic gestures but through millions of small choices aligned with the biological principles that governed human consciousness. As she concluded her presentation and watched confidence return to her team's faces, Elena reflected on the profound truth that had guided her transformation. The greatest victory wasn't over external enemies but over the internal patterns of weakness that prevented most people from accessing their true capabilities. Those who understood this principle and applied it systematically became genuinely unbreakable, not because they avoided difficulty but because they had built the neural infrastructure necessary to transform any challenge into an opportunity for demonstrating strength, wisdom, and unshakable presence. The boardroom crisis had passed, but Elena's real victory had been achieved years earlier through the daily choices that built an unbreakable mind, one neural pathway at a time.